Happy New Year, everyone. It has been about 6 months since the last Right Minds podcast. It was July last year, if you can believe it. And today, Origin joins me again to talk about concepts that we've been discussing for the past few shows, now over 6 months ago. But we touched on them almost by accident last time, and this time we're going into it on purpose. These, from the last two shows, the main themes were around Neo-paganism and ethno-nationalism in the New Zealand Maori context. And now in 2022, we have another interesting development in that area. We have a story titled Karakia is Key to Water Safety, and that was promoted by the Coastguard New Zealand. So welcome to the show, Origin.
Good evening, Dieuwe, and good evening, Right Minds listeners. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, we've got Maori Kaihotu, which is a producer of the canoe or the waka, who makes sure that everyone paddles in time, and is essentially like an agent of the, what would you say, a Maori Coastguard?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the New Zealand Coastguard here, so I'll put it up on the screen for those who are watching the video version of this, or make sure you've got something to look at here. But yeah, essentially, he's described as the top Maori manager at the Coastguard New Zealand.
Yes.
And that is not actually quite a government agency. So I saw a tweet from the conservative, the faux conservative commentator, Liam Hare, and he has very liberal tendencies, but sometimes his conservative instincts come through, and he was mockingly praising the Coast Guard doing this and saying, as a conservative, he liked the mixing of religion and, of church and state and religion and politics, that he thought, this is a great conservative development. I think saying so ironically and in a mocking way, but touching on the truth.
Yeah.
Then somebody pointed out, actually, the Coast Guard, the New Zealand Coast Guard, is a private organisation. Not officially a Coast Guard.
I actually didn't know that. I thought it was an arm of the Defence Force.
Yeah, which it is in many countries, but not in New Zealand, interestingly enough. Yes, it is a private organisation, but it is the official Coast Guard of New Zealand.
Yeah, I think this ties into the broader discourse around Matauranga Maori, which is the Te Ao Maori perspective on science and scientific understanding. And it's been highlighted recently by the Free Speech Union and 7 academics who wrote to the listener in rejecting Matauranga Maori and its influence in the universities and school system.
Mm-hmm. And this is on the back of an announcement that traditional knowledge would be treated on par with science in a educational setting.
Yes.
And obviously for the old guard, liberal, secular elites, the few that were left in the academic institutions, this was a big deal to them. And I think they were slightly blindsided in that they were then suddenly attacked by, I hate to call it the wokeness,
yes,
but basically the woke beast came for them, and they were caught off guard.
Yeah. And they appealed to some of their high priests. I think even Richard Dawkins was involved at one point.
Yeah. They got a tweet from Richard Dawkins. Again, if I can dig that up, I'll put it up on the screen for those who are watching on video. And certainly created massive discontent and a sort of a civil war inside the academic establishment in New Zealand.
Well, I want to say something really controversial here, Dieuwe, and I'd like to say, well, actually, I may preface it first by saying that positivism, which is the understanding that these academics would have, that there's only empirical evidence and that there is no room for theology or any other sort of philosophical thought. Only what you can objectively reason and understand is what defines reality. Mm-hmm. That's what positivism is. That's sort of one branch of understanding. And there's also another branch of understanding where you have phenomenological understanding, where you have your subjective interpretation of reality around you. And I think the two ships and they're sailing past each other, and I think they both have something valuable to add. In a sense, I think that Matauranga Maori is, in essence, and it may lead into some of the points we're talking about before we came live, I think by having a phenomenological understanding which is grounded in meaning, gives you the impetus to even study something. So why even study something if you don't have any meaning in which to study it, right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
So by completely dismissing Matauranga Maori, you actually, although it's not empirical positive science, but I think they've tried to conflate it as such.
Yes, absolutely. So it's because the people promoting this are subjective and moral relativists, so that there's no one objective source of truth. Everybody has their own personal truth, and so you cannot place one experience above another experience.
Yes.
And that's why they're conflating these two things. Because obviously the traditional knowledge is accumulated over time.
Yeah.
Through some kind of experimentation, though not deliberate often. And they accumulate this knowledge because what works and what doesn't work, and who survives and who doesn't survive. And so they can build up this natural knowledge. And I actually saw a comparison made by a traditionalist commentator who pointed out fish in Norway and the Vikings, and they would eat cod, and because of the vitamins in the cod, they would grow strong and be healthy. And then, due to some changes in migration, they went, I believe, to Iceland or Greenland, and the community there died out because they no longer had access to cod. They didn't have the scientific understanding of why they had to eat cod, which had to do with the vitamin D that they wouldn't get from the sun.
Yeah.
And so the communities there that lost access to cod, they died out, and their bones, broke down, and the ones who had, but it became part of their religious, traditional
to eat
experience to eat cod,
because
the ones who did, they were strong and they survived.
Yeah, it's still a tradition today. I'm like a quarter Norwegian, and there's a strong tradition of eating fish on toast for breakfast in Norway and the Scandinavian countries.
And that has so you cannot completely discount these traditions and customs that often exist for a reason, although they don't fully understand why in a truly scientific, as in scientific method and empiricist way, why this is the case. Although today we can understand it. And you can find the same in the scriptures and a lot of Old Testament rules that were laid down for the Jews, for the Israelites. We can look at that with a scientific eye today to say, oh, that makes sense, from the empirical studies that we can do today, but it was given to them as a religious, symbolic meaning.
And you can't have the understanding of science without the symbolic meaning, because you have to have a reason to eat cod, and the reason to eat cod is what you've just explained. And if you don't have a reason to eat cod, or even question why you would want to eat cod, then you wouldn't have any reason to scientifically study it. So it's more important. My argument is actually it's more important than positivism. And like in the Christian tradition, you need to have the one source of truth that inspires you for this type of inquiry, to reveal what has been laid down by the highest order possible.
Yeah, and this is where we saw the scientific revolution, the scientific method itself from Sir Francis Bacon. It was within Christianity that they found the reason to do these scientific inquiries, because they worshipped a God of order, and following order, they could discover more of the world around them. And that's why they did these things, and that's what drove them to do these things. And this is why the science of ancient Greece, who they were at the time the most scientifically advanced, but their scientific traditions were stillborn, in the sense that they then started to worship those who'd made these discoveries, and they then became, you couldn't question the scientific teachers, or after they died, often their theories were revered, and the so-called science, or at least they were philosophers really, became the truth. And of course, one could not question the truth.
And it's interesting that you've touched on the Greeks, because it's come up a lot recently, just in sort of Facebook and internet circles. There's a lot of sort of polytheism, a return to like the Kali Yuga and Indian polytheism,
and European Norse mythology, and English Celtic stuff.
And this is a mistake, because what it is by creating these demigods and not having the ultimate source of truth, the demigods essentially, and it's the same for Te Ao Māori and the Māori gods, is that you are projecting human psychology into these pernicious gods that are just like extensions from humans on Earth above you, and they are cruel, and they have all the same cruelties as human beings on Earth. They're not. You can't find an abundance of love and mercy through this notion of demigods, because they are just psychological projections.
Mm-hmm. And this brings us back to the article that I started off with, it's claiming that karakia were the key to water safety, and so these karakia traditional prayers, or they call them prayers, so incantations of, in this case, to the god of the sea, Tangaroa, and they, claiming here that he has the final say when it comes to swimming in his domain, and that this is the reason why more than 30 people have drowned in lakes, rivers, and seas over the summer holiday period. So then you have, of course, the the high priest of the Coastguard saying that you should offer some kind of religious service to these demons or demigods, whatever you wish to call them, and then they will, so that you won't drown in the oceans in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So you see there's this exact same return to that neo-paganism becoming embedded in more and more spaces, more and more organizations within New Zealand. Even, we're talking 6 months ago, we were talking about the Reserve Bank,
yes.
and people were shocked, and if I still tell people about it today, they don't know, surprised. You read an article like this 6 months later, you're not surprised anymore if you're aware of these things.
Yeah.
But again, many people see this shocked and surprised, and they think this is an aberration. This is something weird that's maybe a fad, without realizing this is the new order of things here, or the new disorder, I should say.
It is, and it's to supplant the Christian order that has preceded it. So we've had these positivists that have come in. These Enlightenment-inspired individuals, well, I call them anti-Enlightenment, and they've removed Christendom from the institutions which were founded by Christian cultures, and now there's a vacuum, and they have to fill the vacuum with something, but they're filling it with a lesser truth. And I want to touch on this and get your thoughts on it, Dieuwe, that Māori still, not all iwi, but some iwi have the concept of Io, the one God, so it does have a monotheistic aspect to it.
And even generic Māori mythology has kind of a creator, a couple, I believe, in a sense, of a man and a woman who have these children, who become the gods of all of the different parts of the earth, and one of them is a fallen, effectively Satan.
Yes.
And
they divide the light from the day and the darkness,
and so on. So you see this in most cultures around the world.
There was a void as well.
And many, and for instance, you talk about the creator Io. They even have a concept of essentially a Noah. A Noah who survived the flood. Many of these cultures have it's a natural theology.
Yeah, they have it's a natural theology, right? Yeah. So, even because we think, say, scripturally, is that Christ will be revealed to all men, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what natural theology is. It's even though they may not have heard the gospel, that these people still aimed, albeit imperfectly, towards a monotheistic religion that had some qualities of truth, but not the absolute truth.
Yeah, and this degraded over time and across these generally speaking, as they morally decayed and became more warlike and so more disconnected from the truth. In some small way it survived, but on the whole, you had this complete breakdown into effectively a legion of demons that would control different aspects of nature.
Cruel,
and they were always cruel.
You were always at the mercy. Yeah. So you were at the mercy of unhinged projections, psychological projections.
Yeah. And then the missionaries came to New Zealand. They liberated the people from that slavery and restored the truth to them.
Yeah.
And now it turns around again, and there's an attempt to revive this.
Only because there's a vacuum.
Yeah. And they look back, and obviously you have the agenda again, the cultural relativists, but you have the progressive movement tries to sort of they think the natives have been colonized, talk about the white man and so on, but really that's what they see is where Christianity came from. It's primarily anti-Christian. anti-whiteness is just because that's what they associate with Christianity.
Yeah. Albeit it's a Semitic religion.
Yeah, I know. Right. That's their
and
association.
Our ancestors were colonized and
Exactly.
let go of our pagan ways.
Yeah, right, exactly. Our ancestors were pagan in the same way that the natives of these islands, their ancestors were pagan.
Yeah.
But you see the association of whiteness with Christianity. You can see it when you have someone who is not white who promotes these Christian ideals. They then have internalized white supremacy, which is just a way of saying they're Christian.
Yeah,
and that's what and they won't openly connect this, and I think many of them even subconsciously don't really make this connection. They just see they think they see in colonization without properly being able to identify. No, it's specifically Christianity that they have a problem with, and that's why they think, okay, we can liberate the natives from Christianity and restore their original beliefs, which, as I've explained now, were not the original beliefs. They were decay of the original beliefs back to creation. And now, obviously, you have this interesting inversion where, for instance, many of the Pacific Islanders are more Christian, and you thankfully have this in South Auckland, where you have a lot more Christians because of the Pacific Islanders who live here.
Yeah.
And then you get this interesting disconnect with the many of the white liberal progressives who then see, oh no, how come the brown man who was colonized with the white man's religion is now bringing the quote-unquote white man's religion to attack me, an enlightened liberal progressive. And so, they can see it sometimes, but for the most part, they're scared of it. They want
to remain ignorant.
Yeah.
But I really want to ram home the point here that if you're resistant to Matauranga Maori, I think it's a mistake. I think there's an opportunity for conservative religious folk to actually ride the coattails of this, because it's a challenge to the positivists that have created this vacuum in the first place. They're the ones that started to tear down the structures. It wasn't any other. This happened long before immigration to New Zealand. So people who say, it's immigrants coming to the country. You're wrong. This has been a process that's happened in the last 200 years since the French Revolution. So this is actually a good challenge, albeit it's misguided. It's something that is, from my perspective, it's something that should be endorsed, just for the sheer fact that we are breaking the positivist hold on reality and a reality that's denied people the truth and order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just the nihilistic worldview that came with Darwinism and with many of the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment philosophers.
But even Darwin through natural selection still had a natural theology in that by having selection, that indicates a telos or teleology, which is an order and purpose to something's existence. Mm-hmm. So people often overlook that fact, and even Dawkins overlooked that fact. So, and the fact that something has changed from something indicates that there was actually an original thing that was created to begin with. Mm-hmm. But even people like Darwin, I think, wouldn't be particularly happy about what has happened with in academia in terms of positivism, like smashing all, and to be reductionist here, to all sort of like subjective, symbolic interpretation of existence and reality.
In talking about selection and what Darwin had with selection, obviously he didn't come up with that idea. Even many of his ideas go all the way back to some of the early Greek philosophers. But his main idea around natural selection actually really was first observed by Gregor Mendel, who was an Augustinian friar. And he's the one who sort of developed the idea of genetics and being able to do artificial selection between breeding different plants together and developing their genetics.
Which is just creating an environment, really.
You're taking the pre-existing DNA, you're blending it together, mixing it together to get the results that you want. And obviously Darwin's ideas were trying to develop this in a natural application over a long period of time, trying to explain away the creator, which obviously to this day doesn't answer where did all of the genetic material come from. And this is why creationists, even young earth creationists like myself, have no problem with natural selection, because It's like, yeah, well, sure. Different animals will breed together and their genetics will mix, but the genetics existed to begin with. We're not creating new genetics, generally speaking. And yeah, that's where the idea was we can create a purely naturalistic explanation and we can explain away God and we can have a natural universe that has no meaning and no purpose, and we can be freed from the idea that we have accountability and authority, that there is a divine hierarchy and order. And so we end up in this place where, like, eventually now, obviously at the time it was like a cool science, science becomes a new God. And we have seen this so much over the last 2 years especially, where like trust the science, the science will save us. Everything becomes idealizing the science. And yet if there can be no objective truth, then naturally that will be challenged. And we've seen this with the civil war in academia now, because there cannot be one, there cannot be the one false god that rules over the secular worldview. Isn't possible. It's not possible. It's not a coherent narrative.
No, it's not. And the modern world is essentially about, and we touched on it before, breaking with Christianity and the other lesser religions to disenchant the world. And that is, by disenchant, I mean to strip and render it subordinate to positivism. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm pleased with Matauranga Maori, because it's a challenge to that. It's a challenge to the hegemony that it has over our understanding of reality. And I think it's so, it's slightly reductionist here, but I think you can't have an understanding of anything scientific without meaning. You have to have a purpose. You have to be able to inquire. So why do you inquire? You inquire because it's meaningful to you first. And the meaning is something that's part of our consciousness. And positivists can just explain that away and say, well, it's just consciousness. Well, frankly, that's not good enough, because what is just? What do you mean by just? There is some divine order and principle, and I think that's the Logos, which is Jesus Christ, fully man and fully God incarnate on earth here for us, who solved the problem of uniting heaven and earth by bringing the higher truth down, all meaning down to earth. And this has been lost. That concept has been lost. It's been devoured by positivism. And I want people to, even though the Matauranga Maori understanding is incorrect, I want people to see that it's actually possible. If we start talking in this language of meaning, we can wrestle back some of the landscape of the discourse for us. We can actually say, hey, we've got something to offer. Because at this stage, I mean, we know we've got something to offer, but to people who are nihilists or undecided or immersed in positivism, they don't want to have a bar of us. And it's our duty to take the truth to them and to try and bring them forward to us, and to reveal their talent for the highest good, which is God.
Absolutely. Thank you. There are some dangers with Matauranga Maori that we should identify as well,
yes.
Because it's not just, oh yes, this is a good opportunity, although certainly should be used. For instance, if people are open to the divine, then that provides more common ground than when people completely reject supernatural entirely. You then have a break in the underlying view of how the world works when somebody... And I don't know how much of this Neo-paganism is sincere either. I have to be a little bit careful there. Yeah, that's true. Is this just LARPing? Yeah. Do they, oh yes, we say our karakia to the god of the sea.
I think some of the people that make these karakias are probably genuine. They're probably trying to discover something that's been absent to them, because their culture has been smashed by positivism. Mm-hmm. But I think the people like the media and the academe, they are really driven to promote this as a tool to basically break down Christianity as well, the essentially established order.
And then it becomes more difficult as a danger is that you get more and more of these ceremonies you see here where, and I was talking to somebody recently who was telling me they went had to go to a new site, a new building site, part of the company that was opened up, and what's the thing in the opening ceremony is, of course, that they have a shaman who's going to be reciting incantations over the new site, providing blessings and so on over this. And A, you can't understand it, but B, if you could understand it, you would know that they're not praying to God, they're praying to
a demigod,
to a demigod, to the demons. And so that makes it more difficult for Christians because perhaps where you previously lived in a secular environment without, where there was no, in a sense, it would feel like there was no real false worship going on that you could get entangled in, although the false worship being an idolatry of literally every physical object and all types of media and every passion. That was like the idolatry of secularism, is that you become more in conflict with this rather obvious display of idolatry towards these pagan elements. Whereas previously it was less visible. You could come into conflict with that more and more, and there could be more room for persecution. Although we are seeing this on the other side too. For instance, the ban on what they call conversion therapy or any providing people with the Christian teachings on sexuality, on gender, on how
basically
men and
the
women
theology
exist.
of the body.
Yeah, that's it. Pure, and that becomes illegal and difficult as well in that same sense. So there's as there is this fragmentation between these competing worldviews that are seen as relative to each other by an increasing, at least by the elites and much of academia and the media, that does create, as there are more of these fragments, every single one of these fragments will come into conflict with Christianity in a different way.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I don't want anyone to think that I'm going down the route of nominalism, which is in general ideas are just names that we attach to objects without any, and objects just have no other corresponding reality. And I think this is the issue with the separation of materialism and phenomenology. I think it's created this duality, and that's been a heresy that's been ongoing for quite some time. Plato had the one and the many, which was a dualistic heresy, and then Descartes had mind and matter. So
Descartes being the beginning of this modern duality that we see, mind and matter, and you see the full and final embodiment of this in the transgender heresy, where the mind is the true self and the body is the raw material, and the raw material can be reforged and rearranged to reflect the mind. All right. So there's a separation between mind and body, which is antithetical to Christianity, which is that we are one, we are one being. Our mind, spirit, and our body are one.
That's what St. Paul teaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. So. And there is in some small way sort of a reflection of the Godhead there with the three persons of the Godhead are one God. In that same sense, we have we have a body and a soul, and we are one, but we are one.
I think the Greek was the soma, the pneuma, and the psyche. So that's what because Saint Paul was all written in Greek. Or Apostle Paul was written in Greek, and and that's it's a Trinitarian understanding of the human person. And that there was the Greek word is ousia, which is there's one origin. There's always one origin, and that one origin is God. So even the Trinity itself has overlapping parts, but it always has one origin, which is God, the Father.
And Descartes is where you break this up into, at least in the modern sense, we start to see you're a brain driving a meat sack. Kind of that's the philosophy that becomes the horrifically nihilistic outlook that people have on the world today.
And this is a point, it's slightly unrelated, but it's something that Dieuwe and I have been talking about. If you investigating Christianity, you have to live in it. You can't be a brain floating out in space, looking down. You actually have to have a religious life. You have to be a religious person. You have to pray, and you have to respect the Sabbath, which is the Sunday. And you have to make sure you adhere to at least, reading the Gospels regularly. Like, you have to try and focus on that.
Well, Christianity is transformational. It's it is a worldview and a way of life. If you truly accept what is revealed in the scriptures, then you will live that. And that, to a large degree, has been lost in modern Christianity, where maybe they go to church for an hour on Sunday, and that's the Christianity, rather than no, this is God claims every part of your life. He claims every part of the world. Yeah. Everything.
And it's hard, by the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And everything belongs to God, and your life should be transformed, and that's what makes the Christian life hard.
Yeah, and I just want to tie it back into positivism. Positivism thinks that you can be a brain out in space, observing reality, but no human behaves like that. Where we are embodied, we're here, we're incarnate in this world, we live in this world. We're not separate from it, we're not looking down on our ant farm, making objective decisions about the course of events. We're not God. We are creatures that are embodied in this reality. And if you want to discover the truth as a Christian, you have to embody the faith, mind, body, and spirit. Otherwise, you're not gonna reap the fruits of it.
And a lot of this missing in modern Christianity and mainstream Christianity, and the way that Christianity is presented, opens up more space for the new paganism as well, because these people are looking for meaning.
Yeah.
Right. They know that the duality and the relativism is not fulfilling, and it's nihilistic, and they have no meaning, and they have no purpose in their lives, and they look for it somewhere. Well, they're going to find it one way or another, and what's the thing that's shouting out to them the loudest is what may draw them in.
Yeah.
So if you see more and more of this paganism being promoted, that's what will draw people in.
I know, and that's why you actually see genuine white supremacists getting into the Bhagavad Gita and riding the tiger with the Kali Yuga, and you'll see this on these right-wing forums, and that's what they're discussing. They're discussing paganism. They're not discussing Christianity. They're discussing Norse gods, Germanic gods, and Druidism, and even Satanism. So that's the multiplicity. That's the danger.
So all the more important to really live out and embody the truth, and for Christianity to be something that people can see. And this really jumped out to me and we're departing a little bit here from the original premise, but I'll tie it back in. I was watching of all things, the Elon Musk interview with the Babylon Bee.
Oh, yes.
And I noticed there, I was expecting a lot. It was fairly bland. And then they get to the end, they ask him a question about Christianity, which you'd hope would have been like the main subject of the interview, but it wasn't. And he starts out by taking them on, where they're recording this on a Sunday, and he goes out and he says, "Why are you not in church? What are we not doing in church?" And he talks, and he starts to go into the parables or miracles that Jesus did, and parables that he tells, and he starts to talk about taking communion and being baptized, and
because he's an Anglican, right?
Because he was Anglican in South Africa, so you had the Dutch Reformed and the English Anglicans, and he starts to talk about these things in some way, but he can see that the guys at the Babylon Bee are not really living the way they should be. He can see the holes where there's no transformation in their lives, where they're just doing like what's easy and convenient in the secular world. Yeah. But he knows, he remembers from his childhood, he remembers these things that don't quite make sense to him. Yes. And he can talk about, why did Jesus turn water into wine? Why did he do that? Or why did he say, "Take, eat, this is my body and this is my blood"? And he goes, "Oh, this is kind of weird." But there's nobody there to give him answers. There's nobody there to engage him at that metaphysical level and to say, let's think about that for a little bit. Let's talk about that. Let's explain what this means for the Christian life. Yeah. And so amazing that you have, I had this in an interview with the richest man in the world, and he has these thoughts at the back of his head, but yet at the same time he can't quite find anyone to truly engage with him at that level, because obviously he's only going to find people who are famous, and in the popular world he's only going to give an interview to these guys who made it to the top.
Yeah.
But the only guys who can make it to the top are not capable of such thinking.
Pray for him.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, there is still a flickering flame, and it's better to have a flickering flame than no flame at all.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think there is, the element with the Babylon Bee guys is that, you touched on metaphysics there. Well, the positivists, they dispense with metaphysics. There's no metaphysical explanation here on Earth. And all of us can fall into that trap. That's the narrative. And once again, it's tying it back to Matauranga Maori. It's incorrect, but the movement itself is actually a positive for us, and we should adopt the same strategies. We can't be passive anymore.
We need to engage with this.
Yeah, we need to engage with it and support the things that are true, and obviously dispense with what is untrue.
In this, as we've been doing here, is look at these things, and then they can be an excellent conversation starter. What is the truth? What do we base the truth in? And what is the highest truth? Because ultimately, what is true, people will worship. People will worship the truth with a capital T.
Yeah.
And if that truth is not Jesus Christ, then that truth is something else.
Yeah.
And that's what they will be worshipping.
Yeah.
And that's something the sort of the liberals, libertarians, and secularists, they can't escape it. Like they're in like a shrinking minority now. Strangely, but they thought we've achieved the post-religious society.
Yeah, we're free.
And yet they enshrine, and then suddenly there it is enshrined. The worship of the state, the worship of science.
Yeah.
Like the worship of literally anything. Celebrities and like all of it's there, and everybody is like super religious. And the small remnant of the true believers in the post-religious world, they're confused and they're blind. They're getting into trouble. They're getting into all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
The remnant of the new atheists, they're like, whoa, what happened? Right? And as they get beaten into the ground, as they're pulverized, as their reputations are destroyed, they're like wondering what happened.
Yeah. And also the people that develop the worldview on the backs of the new atheists now are some of the most broken people that you'll meet, generally speaking. And it's very crippling, and it's very spiritually abusive, and it's very nihilistic. And by saying that you're just your parts and there's nothing more to you, that really has no meaning whatsoever. Like if we're just like quarks and anti-quarks, and then atoms, then cells, and then tissue and ligaments and random electrical impulses firing off from neurons. Well, that really doesn't deliver any meaning whatsoever. And at least what the Kai Hotu is doing by asking people to pray. Well, what does prayer do? Prayer makes you think and reflect upon what is meaningful. I mean, that's a start. And this is just from a utility perspective, and it's slightly reductionist. Once again, I'm trying to appeal to people who are on the fence here, that, it's the prayer will be a tool for you to think about the preparation for safety before you approach the water. And it's probably what many of the academics probably think too.
Yeah, they will then rationalize this to say, well, actually, and the studies show that if you pray before going to the water, whatever, but
why do we pray?
Yeah,
that's the thing. Is there a natural reason why we were predisposed?
And I was just thinking right here about trying to wrap this up, and I thought, no, there's one more thing that I have to say is, how many Christians would be bold enough to say we should pray to decrease the road toll, we should pray to decrease the drownings, we should pray to reduce the number of coronavirus deaths, we should pray for these things? There used to be a nation of prayer. In fact, just this very day, I saw somebody post a picture of nurses in a London hospital in the 1950s, and these nurses were kneeling around a table with their hands in prayer, and they were praying before their shift in the hospital. Right, those were, the Anglosphere countries 70 years ago, 60 years ago, and that's what people did before they would start on, before they would go on a holiday, before they would start their work shift.
Yeah.
But when they got up in the morning, that's what they would do. They would pray.
Yep.
And how many would be so bold to encourage that today and to do that today?
Yes. Be bold, be brave. Don't be afraid. Be not afraid.
All right, well, we are out of time and we will wrap this up. And thank you very much for listening. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. The podcast will be up on the Right Minds website, rightminds.nz. It will also be shared on the BFD. And you can always get in touch with me at my Telegram channel at Dieuwe, or you can find me on Twitter at rightmindsnz.
The outro for today is Thomas Tallis, English composer from the 16th century, with his hymn, If Ye Love Me.
Thomas Tallis, many of his tunes are still sung today in my own tradition. I still have in my Psalter a tune by Thomas Tallis that we sing the Psalms to. Cool. So if we have our traditions, they can be here hundreds of years later. Yeah. We're still singing the works of Thomas Tallis.
Yeah, who is a verified genius.
Absolutely. Yeah. And here he is, his hymn based on Scripture, the singing of Scripture. So with that, we will leave you today, and we hope it will not be 6 months before the next podcast, but
lack of lockdown permitting.
Certainly. Until then, good night, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.